Tisha B'Av, the ninth day of the Hebrew month of Av, stands as the most solemn day on the Jewish calendar. It is also one of the most challenging dates on the Jewish calendar in terms of its relevance to our times. It is time to bring the legacy of the Shoah into the framework of Tisha B'Av. Commemorating the Shoah will upgrade Tisha B'Av by enhancing the sense of urgency and relevance associated with the day. Tisha B'Av should be seen as an annual opportunity to train the muscle of collective and individual survival in extreme conditions of hardship, adversity, and scarcity. The work of Rabbi Ephraim Oshri, Zichro Livracha, is the most important source. Why discuss Tisha B'Av and the Shoah now? One contemporary reason is that the last Holocaust survivors are dying. Sovereignty, even in Israel, may be decimated, just as any diaspora, even in America, may end in calamity. Let us make Tisha B'Av the day when every Jew learns how to survive and then rebuild, as much a handbook as it is a history book. Rethinking Tisha B'Av, From Mourning to Spiritual Readiness, by Gidi Grinstein and Professor Ari Afilalo. Tisha B'Av, the ninth day of the Hebrew month of Av, stands as the most solemn day on the Jewish calendar. It commemorates multiple catastrophes which, according to tradition, happened on this date throughout Jewish history. It is also one of the most challenging dates on the Jewish calendar in terms of its relevance to our times. While its traditions include fasting and lamenting, as well as a general warning against sinat chinam, baseless hatred among Jews, it is also limited in the practical teachings that it conveys. Tisha B'Av primarily commemorates the destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem in 586 before current era, and of the second temple in the year 70 of the current era. In these contexts, Tisha B'Av represents the culmination of both destruction processes through a mourning process that symbolically begins on Asara B'Tevet, the 10th day of the month of Tevet, when the siege on Jerusalem was laid, and escalates on the 17th day of Tammuz, when the walls of Jerusalem were breached. The 9 days in the month of Av, and even more so during the week and on the day of Tisha B'Av, represent further milestones in the collapse, destruction, and burning of Jerusalem, which are experienced through additional steps of self-affliction, which include, by different customs, avoidance of music, meat, and intimacy. The process of mourning eases, by different traditions, as of the midday of Tisha B'Av, and ends with the reading of Nachamu, You shall be comforted, on the following Shabbat, and no later than the 16th of Av. Tisha B'Av also commemorates other calamities that befell upon the Jewish people, including the fall of Betar in the year 135, the Crusades in the 12th centuries, the expulsions from England in 1290 and from Spain in 1492, and the onset of the liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto in 1942. Noticeably, some of these events took place in the land of Israel in the context of sovereignty, while others devastated diaspora communities. Yet Tisha B'Av calls for commemorating all these events together, making it the saddest day in the Jewish calendar. Alas, our tradition calls for very passive observance of the holiday, fasting and avoidance of life pleasures, in addition to reading the ghastly Megillat Eicha, which describes the destruction of Jerusalem and the personal tragedies that ensued. And yet, in this era of remarkable power and prosperity in Israel and among world Jewry, the legacy of Tisha B'Av seems distant and not contemporarily relevant. This is especially evident when Tisha B'Av is compared to the holidays of Sukkot, Pesach, Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Chanukah, Purim, or Tu B'Shvat, which feel every year as relevant as ever before. Against this backdrop, This article makes a dual claim. First, it is time to bring the legacy of the Shoah into the framework of Tisha B'Av and commemorate it within the most solemn day of the Jewish year. This would achieve two major effects. First, commemorating the Shoah will upgrade Tisha B'Av by enhancing the sense of urgency and relevance associated with the day. Second, for the Shoah, its memory, Zecher HaShoah, would be consolidated and eternally placed in the proper context of the annual cycle of the Jewish year for generations to come. At present, and as long as Holocaust survivors have been alive, the memory of the Holocaust was justifiably singled out compared to other equal-sized calamities such as past destructions and expulsions. It was also scattered along the year to accommodate different constituencies and rationales. January 26 served for international commemoration, marking the date of the liberation of Auschwitz. Meanwhile, Israel commemorates the Shoah on the 27th of Nisan, which is after Pesach and before Memorial and Independence Days. This date is connected to the rebellion in the Warsaw Ghetto and served to reinforce the Zionist narrative of national resurrection in the State of Israel. Meanwhile, many non-Zionists and diaspora ultra-Orthodox communities remember the Shoah on the 10th of Tevet, which is the date that commemorates those without a marked grave. Alas, none of these dates unify the Jewish people in the remembrance of the Shoah, like Tisha B'Av should and could do. Second, Tisha B'Av should be seen as an annual opportunity to train the muscle of collective and individual survival in extreme conditions of hardship, adversity, and scarcity. This effect can only be achieved through learning. Unlike all distant catastrophes, the Shoah generated extensive societal knowledge about how Jewish communities, families, and individuals survived. In other words, the written legacy of the Shoah is the key to future resilience, and it should be studied annually on Tisha B'Av. In this context, the work of Rabbi Ephraim Oshry, Zichro Livracha, is the most important source. Rabbi Oshry recorded halachic questions from Jews who struggled to maintain religious life under Nazi oppression, as well as the answers that the rabbis gave them. After the war, he published a 5-volume series titled Responsa from the Depth, She'elot Utshuvot Mima'amakim, which includes hundreds of practical, spiritual, and moral dilemmas of people striving to survive in extreme adversity. While some questions are halachic regarding observance of Jewish religious laws, such as, can I say the Shema in a latrine? Is it permissible to wear the clothing of a dead person to stay warm? Can I bless God for freedom while being enslaved in a labor camp? Meanwhile, other responsa are ethical and moral regarding how to divide scarce resources or make life and death decisions. Together, the halachic and moral questions and answers have a third profound effect. They turn a person who is the object of dire circumstances into the subject of their fate by controlling their response within the terrible conditions of their existence. Oshry wrote, I recorded my responsa to serve as an internal sign of wonderment at a people on whose neck a sharp sword lay permanently, and in spite of it, they continued to live their life in holiness and integrity. This effect was highlighted as existentially important by Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Rabbi Sachs writes in Crisis and Covenant that such an outlook demonstrates what covenantal resilience looks like in action. He too recommends placing the remembrance of the Shoah in the context of Tisha B'Av. Sachs wrote, Tisha B'Av, reimagined, becomes the day we affirm theologically and practically the view that the covenant survives intact even in the valley of the shadow of death. That is the posture Tisha B'Av must now reclaim. Why discuss Tisha B'Av and the Shoah now? One contemporary reason is that the last Holocaust survivors are dying, which requires reimagining how to enshrine the memory of the Holocaust. In a broader view of Jewish history, even as we live through incredible blessings of security and prosperity, we must prepare for their possible loss by teaching ourselves and our children not just about what was destroyed, but also about what endured. The coincidence of this year, when we begin reading the book of Dvarim on the eve of Tisha B'Av, makes our point even more acute. In Dvarim, Moses repeatedly warns the Jewish people of likely gravitation between exile and sovereignty, catastrophe and prosperity, curse and blessing. In other words, sovereignty, even in Israel, may be decimated, just as any diaspora, even in America, may end in calamity. In other words, the Torah instructs us to be aware of imminent crisis even during prosperity, and to believe in redemption even in crisis. 5 years ago, we launched a project called Depth to Summits, with the goal of reimagining Tisha B'Av not only as a day of mourning for what was lost, but as an annual fire drill for Jewish survival. The threats that the Jewish people may face in the future are different from those of the past, but the spiritual muscles we will need are the same. Let us make Tisha B'Av the day when every Jew learns how to survive and then rebuild, as much a handbook as it is a history book. May you have a meaningful Tisha B'Av and an easy fast.